Okay, you guys, are you ready for another interview during the Sundance Film Festival? I am, as always, Lauren deLisa Coleman, bringing you another episode of the Inside series for Film.io. And I have with me our next filmmaker who we're going to interview, who is Britt Hensel. Britt, thank you so much for joining us. She's coming to us from Oklahoma and a reservation there, which she's going to totally get into. We're going to be talking about her film, which is, and I'm going to try and pronounce this right, Udeona in the native language, which translates, I guess, roughly to what they've been taught, right? Mm-hmm. So I am just really excited to talk about this and just how language reveals culture and so much more. It's funny, my viewers know that I spent many years in Paris and was lucky enough to learn French, but it's not great by any stretch of the imagination. But as you learn other languages, you realize, if you pay attention, it shows you what that culture thinks is important, depending on where, pronouns are and direct objects and things like that, or if they even have them. And so when I saw this about your film, I was so drawn to it. So yes, please, Britt, kick us off with a synopsis of Udeona.
Yeah, this film, at least when I've been talking to people about it, I mean, it's just a film celebrating my community. But essentially it explores expressions of reciprocity from a Cherokee worldview. And the story is kind of brought to life through, a story that an elder and a first language speaker tells to me. So, yeah.
And I'm sorry, the reservation that you're on right now in Oklahoma?
I'm on the Muskogee Creek Reservation.
How is it? What's that like? Because I think people, if you haven't ever been to one before, either kind of glamorize it or see it as just a place where everybody has alcohol problems and that's it, right? And obviously there's some middle ground in all that, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, depending on where you are, I mean, we're all on some sort of native land, whether it's unceded or now a reservation. I mean, it's a wide range for, urban native people. People live like in Seattle, native people are everywhere, but in Oklahoma specifically, because Oklahoma was former Indian territory before the federal government started pushing tribes away from their ancestral homelands in the east and in the north. They set aside this state, the state that is now Oklahoma, but it was called Indian Territory. And so they forced tribes here on their own Trail of Tears or their forced removal. And for my tribe's history specifically, we came from Western North Carolina. We came from the Southeast. So our tribes have been here though since 1838. That was when we first got forced here. Today there's 39 different tribes in the state of Oklahoma. You could drive 5 minutes in one direction and be on a reservation and not even know it. I think there's a lot of, I don't know if the word stigma, but a lot of stereotypical things associated with reservation life.
Yes.
It's like I'm in Tulsa, but we're on the Muskogee Creek Reservation. So, I mean, it's just people being native, living in, like anybody does, lives in another house. I mean, we're an underserved community a lot of the time. So, but yeah.
And were you born there?
No, I wasn't born on the res. I'm actually born and raised in Colorado. My family is all from Oklahoma. My family comes from Sequoyah County on the Cherokee Reservation, which is like further east than Tulsa. So,
got it. So, talk to me about why you felt compelled to bring this story to life, and a little bit more about, just kind of the language elements. I was just really so hit by the fact that you can't say like I made this or whatever, because it's like you're making it into a thing, because you can't make something because the creator has made everything, so you're not making anything. And it kind of just reminds me of what I've read before in certain African cultures where you can't own land because land is given by the creator, so how could you like kind of own something like that, right?
Yeah.
So these notions that we take kind of for granted like every day in Western civilization for the most part have no bearing in other other civilizations, and I think it's just as fascinating to explore that, because it shows obviously the mindset. So could you get a little bit into what you're showing through this film, and again why it was just so important for you to share this story?
Yeah, well, I had the opportunity to start telling this story because of ᎤឫᎤå, and they had this idea. They're a nonprofit based out of Seattle, and they had this idea that they wanted to have 6 different Indigenous filmmakers from 6 different communities all do their own take on what reciprocity means to their people. So there was a bunch of, it wasn't just Native American tribes, there's people from all over the world, but there were 6 of us that were chosen. And it was really interesting because sort of like what you were saying about African cultures is Indigenous people just in general value things differently than Western society does. And a lot of that thing, I feel like that's a pretty safe thing to say, at least. Yeah. Granted, that's my opinion, but I think that's pretty fair. But the language is something that connects people to land. And so, you know, as I'm growing, like I'm not a first language speaker. I wasn't raised speaking the language. I'm learning. Our speakers are mostly in their 70s and 80s. You know, they're older. So it's something that's really important for my tribe, specifically Cherokee Nation, that I'm learning. And so as a filmmaker, you know, incorporating language into what I'm doing is really, really important. But with the idea of reciprocity, which came from ᎤឫᎤô as the topic for this film, I knew that I couldn't do it without talking about language because, again, language is our connection to the land. And so, I have a close friend who's an elder and he's a first language speaker. His name's Tom Belt, who's the one who's narrating the film. I mean, the language for Cherokee people, it's like a mindset. It's a perspective through which you see the world. It's not like anything else. And I always tell people there's no way to directly translate Cherokee to English and English to Cherokee. It's not possible. So our first language speakers, when they hear a word in English, are trying to figure out the mindset of how they would say that in Cherokee. And Cherokee is a polysynthetic language. So it's like you can conjugate a verb like 20,000 times. So there's the language is expansive, but our people, we come from people who are extremely precise with their words. So a lot of that is connected to how we treat one another, how we treat the land, how we speak to one another. But ultimately, like the language is a reflection of the land that we come from, which is why it's so vital to most Native peoples. I just wanted to have that be a huge part of it, and having Tom, the speaker, the first language speaker, and the elder sort of lead the film. That way you're getting this really through and through Cherokee perspective from an elder who sees the world completely different than anybody does. That was kind of the idea of that.
And how long did it take you, Britt, from like kind of start to finish on this?
Yeah. I started shooting in October, but then COVID happened. So we stopped doing some shooting and kind of had to hold off. And then we finished in March of last year. And we did like a full weekend out on the Qualla boundary where the eastern band of Cherokees are. So there are 3 different Cherokee tribes, but we're all related and we have the same language. So we went out there, we shot for 4 days, and then I shot here in Oklahoma for another 2. So not that long.
No, not really. I mean, what were some of the more challenging like parts of that, aside from, you know, COVID, which every filmmaker has had to deal with in his or her own way, but like kind of specific to this? I mean, you were part of the community, obviously, so that wasn't a barrier to get over or anything. What was it? Was it maybe more, I don't know, of like the technical elements, you know, of being a filmmaker, or what?
Yeah, well, this is my 3rd film, so technically I felt pretty sound in doing these things. And the really awesome part that made it even easier was I had an all Cherokee crew. So we're all friends. We all live in the same area. So we had a really awesome shorthand. There wasn't a lot of like them not understanding what my vision was, or we just really collaborated. And because we're all of us, we're all different artists, different disciplines, but some of us had made films before and some of us hadn't. But being able to work together like that, there wasn't a whole ton of challenge. The challenge and the weight that I definitely felt through this film was like getting it right. Because this is a really Cherokee story, and I want to make my elders proud, and I don't want to, you know, sometimes it's hard to talk about these things that are sensitive. Everybody has opinions about culture and tradition in the right way. So I took a lot of time to talk to elders and to talk to my team to make sure we felt good about what we were saying. And I think that it was just really important to note that, you know, when ᎤឫᎤô first approached me about making this film, they said, okay, share the Cherokee perspective. And I said, well, I can't do that unless I have multiple Cherokee perspectives because I'm just one person. So it was it was a really beautiful thing to work with different Cherokees from different tribes, different bands. And we could all kind of pool our resources like, oh, my community would do it this way. Okay, well, we would do it this way. So let's merge all of those elements in so we could give audiences something that is really Cherokee.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
What did you find, or what's kind of surprised you like during this whole journey? I mean, because like you said, you're one person with one perspective in this larger Cherokee world, if you will. So as different people kind of came together, did you get to even learn more about your own culture that maybe you didn't know before, or was it really more about just being able to share it in a way that any viewer from any culture could understand?
Yeah. Well, I think we were that was the goal. So there were 9 of us, 3 from the Eastern Band, and then the rest of us were from Cherokee Nation. So like I said, there are 3 different tribes of Cherokees: Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, United Keetoowah Band in Oklahoma, and then the Eastern Band in our ancestral homelands in North Carolina. So all our people come from there, but only 2 of our groups of people were forced to Oklahoma. So when we all got down together, I mean, we're all very culturally similar. We just do things a little differently. So but yeah, I mean, it was really cool. Anytime I'm around a speaker, I learned something that I've never heard before, or
Really?
we learn about a word, that was different and shares a story or has a perspective that's associated with that word. And you're like, oh, dang, okay, I never thought about it like that before. So, I mean, anytime that I'm with Tom, who's again narrating the film, there's something we all were just like, wow, that was awesome. I've never heard anyone explain it like that before. But yeah, I mean, anytime I'm with other Cherokees, I'm learning things. I think it's just kind of part of that. It's like one of my favorite parts of making films is I don't really feel like you ever arrive all the way. I think it's always a new evolution of the next thing that you do. And I always find something new to learn and that I'll take with me to the next film. So
that's so great to be able to hear. I mean, I don't know. I just have like so many different thoughts and like questions about it overall. I mean, do you know like roughly, Britt, how many official and what, how is this even being defined? But Cherokee people still exist right now.
Geez, I don't even know what a number would be.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one of the really interesting things is I think Native people, Indigenous people are, because we have been so ignored and our stories haven't been shared, and the history about, Native representation, who's here, are we still alive? Those questions are things that a lot of people really don't know the answer to. And it just goes to show how important it is that we're having the opportunities to share our own stories.
Well, yeah, so true. And especially with like, one of the hot tribes like Cherokee, everybody always tries and acts like they have some kind of, relationship to Cherokee, even though there's so many different tribes.
I think
that,
it is,
with Cherokee, I just feel like in particular is like, if there's exploitation, then it's exploitation of like, Cherokee. Like everybody has a little bit of that or something, and they really don't know anything about it or appreciate anything about it, really, not having, any real history. So it's very important when, these types of films that you and your collaborators, your team have put together, can put out, because it is stuff that you don't, because you have a completely different culture, you don't even think about it really. I had the opportunity to take an art class in Native art, but like Southwestern, right? So like New Mexico, that kind of area. But, still kind of those same basic themes about just what the patterns like kind of meant, whether it was weaving or on ceramics, and how that always related back to earth and spirit. And so, it's just like so fascinating when you look at that, because you're like, well, today if you see something, it's just like, well, it's a cool design. It doesn't really mean anything. Whereas these designs, meant something very deep and was shared and handed down. So it's just great that you still have access to those in the space who are older, who can, kind of share that. Because, I mean, none of this is really like curated in like major volumes of books anywhere, is it? Like, no, I mean, like major, like Native, like for Cherokee, just like Cherokee dictionary, boom, like a series volume.
Yeah, we got stuff like that. I think that's the other thing. I think that our resources that we have, I think people don't even know that those things exist for us. I mean, there's 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States. Everyone with their own language, their own traditions, their own customs, the way they dress traditionally, the way they greet one another, you know? So I think it's something that we're kind of like hitting a curve on, where people are waking up and being like, oh, dang, like Indigenous people are still here. And not one tribe does the same things. But yeah, I mean, traditionally, or I think like historically for Native people, and especially for my tribe, things are passed down orally.
Right. So, that's why I'm saying it's more, I don't want to say fragile, but even more important to kind of keep those things, because it's not something you can refer back to, or like, you know, Google it from, 50 years ago, what certain words meant. You can only get that from somebody who's alive, and somebody who hopefully is alive and has accurate information, right? That
absolutely.
Too is
yeah, I can only speak from my tribe's perspective, although I know there are a lot of tribes doing a ton of work to write things down and doing it in their own way. I mean, you think back, and it's just been predominantly non-Native people doing history on Native people, and that's inherently problematic.
Right.
And so it's really been for the first time, and I would say like the last 50 years, that Native people have been given the opportunity to tell their own stories and document their own histories. So, I mean, filmmaking is an important part of that. And
absolutely.
Also proximity to your community. I think that's really important as well. Like you said, our speakers and our elders are, at least for mine, they're either in Oklahoma or they're in North Carolina. There's only two places. Granted, speakers could live other places, but the majority of our communities are based here.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, we're in a really exciting time, I think, for Native storytelling and Native filmmaking. I mean, Reservation Dogs came out this year or last year, which was huge. First television show to have all Native writers and directors, all filmed on the Muskogee Creek Reservation here. That was made by Sterling Harjo and Taika Waititi. So, I mean, it's things like that. Like, we're turning a corner, and I'm very happy and blessed to be following in the path people before me have made. I'm going to keep trying to pry the door open as wide for people coming behind me.
I think that's great. And I think it's great, too, that Sundance has seemingly made, a really targeted effort to be able to support, Native filmmakers. I mean, there's always, when it's not virtual or hybrid, whatever. Well, anyway, I haven't been to virtual one, which was supposed to be this year, but now it's, a hybrid one, but now it's just virtual. Yeah. But when it was just physical, and I've been there, fortunately, many times physically, it was always cool that there were, different events where you could just, like, it was only about Native filmmakers, or just some kind of either meet and greet or dinners or whatever. That it's really the only film festival at that level that I know of that's made a concerted effort. And I think it's because Redford understood that, like, Utah especially is you know what I mean, definitely inhabited, shall we say, and so to do the minimum to give back. It is very, very key to create those programs and support filmmakers like yourself. So outside of that, because you are just like a regular person, what drove you? Well, because I mean, I think it's important to talk about that, but also too, you're a filmmaker, right? Just a filmmaker. And so what just drew or attracted you to filmmaking as a craft, Britt?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because growing up, I definitely didn't think filmmaking, I honestly wasn't even a thought in my mind. I didn't think it was a possibility. No. I loved to write. I grew up out in the country, so my sister and I didn't have a lot to do. So we were always making stories and, using our imagination to stay busy. So I think it started there, just being young, just being creative. And my dad was always pushing us to, act and sing and write. And so as I got older, I mean, I went to college as a history major. I didn't go to school for filmmaking. My older sister, Taylor, who is also a filmmaker, she went and she got a master's in a film program at Mizzou. So when Taylor did that, I started to go, oh, okay, this might be something I want to do. So her and I worked on our first film together, and it was the thesis for her master's program, but it turned into our first film. And after that, it was just something that I knew that I was going to keep doing, and was sort of, the thing I was going to do spend the rest of my life trying to do. So.
That's very cool. So what do you want to do next? Are you already working on another project or have anything in pre-production?
I have some stuff that I'm working on, still in the very early stages of pre-production, but I got some ideas. I know that I'm going to keep doing things about language and working with elders. For me, I feel like it's kind of where my heart is at right now.
Okay.
So I'm hopefully going to start working on a feature film. That's in my mind what would be next, but you never know. So but something definitely about language and just still working with my community. I mean, that's the thing that matters the most to me. It's the reason why I'm telling stories, and just want to keep working with other Cherokees, people who are trying to learn how to make films.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really happy and passionate about that. So
that's great. Britt, I wish you the best, absolutely, and congrats on being in this year's Sundance Film Festival. If people want to follow you or like the film, whatever, what's like the best way to like keep track of like what's up, or if they even want to like explore more about Cherokee culture, language, etc., what might you suggest?
I always try. Well, first of all, y'all can go to reciprocity.org. That's where all my film and then the other films that I was telling you guys about, they're all the information's on there.
Okay.
My Instagram is always around. And I always send people to Illuminative. It's a great website. They also have an awesome Instagram account, and it's basically things that everybody should know about the Native people around you.
Okay. And it's Illuminative, so just as it sounds. Okay. Yep. And what's your Instagram handle, just so we know?
It's just Britt, my first name, _Hensel, my last name.
Okay, and it's Hensel, you guys. Great. All right, Britt. Well, thank you so much. Keep doing what you're doing. And again, congrats with this film. And I'm excited to see what else, you come up with, because language, I mean, that's my favorite coming from media. That's like everything, right? And I'm glad that you're able to just kind of look at it and explore it and almost like promote it in a different way.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate you guys taking the time.
Absolutely. All right, Britt. So you guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this like really, really interesting. Do try and check out the film. Again, it translates into what we've been taught, or what they've been taught rather, and just a really, really cool film. So we'll be bringing you more of these interviews all during the Sundance Film Festival. I am Lauren deLisa Coleman for Film.io.